All right, everyone. Week 9, we are looking some more at the running records as well as the case study assignment that's going to round out the semester. Let's talk a bit about the latter first. As I've mentioned previously, the course and the program as a whole are really guided by the International Literacy Association standards for reading specialists, and we've been really emphasizing the standards that are in substandards that are in standard 3, which is around assessment and monitoring. As you can see here, these two, which have popped up on previous assignments as well, are really guiding this case study and the course as a whole, and will be part of the way in which I assess you for your progress via task stream. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at the case study directions, there's really sort of 3 things guiding this assignment, which is going to be very individual driven. In the past, one thing I'm learning from doing this course for the first time, and the program's learning from doing this online for the first time, is really emphasizing and differentiating around your particular setting, your experience, your needs as well. So this is in some ways kind of a pilot for us to sort of think about how we might further individualize the course next year. So there's 3 things to think about in thinking about how you're going to sort of direct the case study work. One is, again, and I've mentioned this over and over again, is about purpose and like situating the work as being as much about doing it for your own benefit and your school's benefit as it is simply to complete an assignment for this class. So I would be thinking very carefully about how can you make this case study work well for you? What can it do for you? For instance, you may want to situate this case study around a learner that may help you, for instance, put together handoff reporting for the teacher of the next grade that they're going to. It may be to take a look more specifically at curriculum you're working on now in the latter half of the year. And this is an opportunity to sort of see how students are doing against the level of text difficulty in it. It may be around pursuing a question you have around a particular student, particular texts, particular methods of assessment in your classroom. I really want you to be thinking about what is it that you're trying to answer or try to achieve, whether for the specific student to learn more about them in whatever way, or to think about your curriculum, your school, other teachers, etc. So getting that down and aligning those things, I think, is really key, because then that's going to play into the vision that you have. You can see in the qualitative reading inventory when you take a look at it that there are multiple kinds of assessments in this inventory, including things such as a miscue analysis. Some of you, I'm sure, have done that. There's think aloud. So there's other assessments both on the fluency side and on the comprehension side. And your purpose is going to define how it is you want to put together an assessment battery. If you'll see from the directions, I require you to do at least 2 of the assessments, but you may choose to do all of the assessments. You may choose to only do 2, 3. These are choices you're going to have to make based on your purpose. And then, of course, there's the logistics. I've laid out a schedule. You've got the qualitative reading inventory. You know your own schedule, say when you're doing park testing, for instance, when you have spring break, if you have a late one. All these things should obviously come into play on how you spend the remainder of the month doing the work. I want you to think about what's best for the case, what's best for your schedule, what's best for the student, and then we can talk further about that. Like I say in the directions, my role changes here, and I'm taking on more of an individual coaching role here to sort of help you achieve your purpose. So next steps, make sure you've read the case study directions. Read the qualitative reading inventory assignment by next Wednesday of next week. It's a really short reading. The book is really simple. And one thing I do suggest is that in addition to those readings, which are really just kind of like what this is, what are the components, and what purposes you might achieve from them, that's why I've assigned this reading. In addition, you'll see there's tons of resources built in later on in the book. Just skim it really quickly and see if it's things that would be of use to you. Because one of the things we'll talk about when you conference with me is just sort of whether you want to make it a curriculum-based assessment, i.e. using text you already have, or whether you want to pull something separate from your curriculum for the analyses. So switching to the running record, Just again, the running record report is due by Tuesday, April 12th. If you saw my directions, it's going to be a shorter assessment. As you can see from the findings and analysis piece, you're really writing about a really sort of very specific piece of text, very specific kinds of errors, and your analysis is going to be very targeted. I'm expecting it to be shorter. It's really kind of a get in and get out kind of a report. And I am setting it up to be formative in that sense of, yes, it's for a grade. Yes, it's for a grade equal to the other reports so far. But it's really designed to sort of get a pulse of how are you feeling about doing reading inventories, and we can talk a bit about interpreting the data and whether we want to use things like running records moving forward. So it's really going to help me help you is really the goal here. So let's talk a bit about doing the analysis. I suspect many of you have already tried it out, or if you're familiar with it already, have some familiarity with it. Regardless, this is a good opportunity to actually just sort of check your work if you've already done it, or if you're waiting for this. This is a good way to frame it. One of the things that Clay implies but doesn't say is the idea is that errors in this case are not merely like tallies, they're actually a sign of information, right? That they tell us something about how the person is reading, not just what they read, right? So I'm using page 21 and I've modified the question sums. This is that whole MSV piece that might seem a little bit confusing. But what she's basically saying is, let's try to get underneath the errors and try to say, well, what's actually causing the student to make them? Because they may say something, they may say more than just simply the student got something wrong. They may say that the student actually knows lots of things, and those things might actually be conflating or imbuing the reading. So again, MSV meaning is really about, did the meaning of the text, either like a picture on the page, the context, say the information in a previous paragraph, a previous sentence, etc., have an impact on the child's reading, right? So in that sense, did they get the idea and do a substitution or conflate words because based on what they were understanding around the text, right? The syntax piece is around, did the child read the sentence in a grammatical, linguistically reasonable manner? I think this is a good way of asking, is like, did they make substitutions in a way that the sentence still made sense, but like that you could just like take a look at that the errors they made are connected to less a question of not understanding the word so much as how they understood the sentence as a whole. And then finally on the visual piece, did the word's appearance or its structure influence the error? Like how was the word on the page? We call that gramophonic. How is the word on the page influencing how the child reads it? So this gets a little tricky in action just because it seems like there's a lot going on and a lot of things could be right, wrong, and the answer to that is yes, that's the case. So the question is how do we make sense of it and what sense we should? So let's do a couple of examples here. Let's just suppose our sentence here is, she has a pretty cat. That's what's on the page. And your student says she has a pretty kitty. Right? So what are we supposed to do about this error? Say the student, say right now we say the student doesn't self-correct, right? We've got kitty instead of cat. So if we go back here, we're thinking a bit about what it is that might make the child say kitty instead of cat. So one easy way to do this, the syntax test is actually quite simple. It's whether or not even with the substitution, did the child read the sentence in a grammatically and linguistically reasonable manner? That is, does the sentence still make sense in English as a result of the error, right? And if it does, we could say that it's a basic syntax error. And I think if you look at it in this case, it is. There was a word substitution, but the sentence actually still holds. There's a slight difference in meaning, of course, based on the word kitten versus the word cat. But the sentence still keeps its sort of structure and its guts, right? Then in the kitty cat thing, we also think about the meaning of the text, right? The child substituted a word that for many would be synonymous, right? Kitty and kitten, cat, these are all words we use to describe a particular animal, right? And so it may be that just simply that's a word that they use interchangeably to suggest the meaning of the word. So they may well know that it's a cat, but they've chosen kitty. So we can also see that this is also a meaning piece here as well. So when we look at the word kitty and cat on the visual sign, it's a little bit more difficult here because the challenge here is that you don't see many letters similar at first. It's not as if you can say, well, the word looked exactly the same as cat. But we can also see that there's a K and a C sound sound alike, and there's the T sound as well. So it may be, in this case, I think this would definitely be an error we'd have to sort of assess based on the way what we saw observing the child on a piece of paper. It's hard to say, but it's possible this is also a visual error as well, based on the way the students saw the word laid out on the page. Um, and based on how the child spells, right? So we would imagine that at an earlier grade, it could very well be a visual error. At a later grade, we would expect that it's probably not. But again, your observation of the child in action is going to tell you something about what you would put. But we know for sure that we would circle or bold in an M and an S, and it's possible that the V as well. So that shows you that like even a simple sentence like this and a simple error can actually have multiple kinds of errors, if you will, inside of it. So if you look at on page 20 of the clay text, you can see that, in fact, in several cases here. We have errors in which all three of the error types are in play. So if you look at this child making a mistake of substituting bedroom instead of what it says is room, you can see that clearly that's a meaning piece. That bedroom is a kind of room. We often say go to your room, right? So those words are in many ways synonymous, right? Syntactically, the sentence still makes sense. The substitution is a noun in replacing a noun. And then bedroom, room, you can imagine is a visual error, right? Because, hey, look, it's if they read it straight from this text, it's at the beginning of a line break. It includes the word room as part of its root, and you can see that that would make a lot of sense in terms of that kind of error. And elsewhere, you can kind of see similar errors, right? Hannah and Anna are substituted, similar word type, proper noun, right? Doesn't change the meaning of a sentence. The sentence still makes sense. The way they read it, they might have just confused names, the meaning of it in light of the text elsewhere. But you can see elsewhere, later on in the next sentence here the students had passed instead of posed, right? And that is simply their misreading, their mispronunciation of the spelling, although maybe it's pasid. Anyway, the way they read the sentence, it comes down to the visual error that they made with the text. And you can see elsewhere, like on this last line here, you can see that the student didn't, with a word like the, right, an article, and this, there was clearly like a mistake in substituting the type of word, as well as misunderstanding the sound in there, or misrepresenting it on the page, the and this, and thus making a visual error. So you can see in many cases here, you see what it amounts to a series of multiple errors inside of one. Okay, so in your analysis section, you're probably wondering what to write about, and there's two things I want to point out. One is the real basic piece is I'm looking for you to sort of identify patterns of error and self-correction within parts or whole of the excerpt. That is, you're going to take the MSV piece and you're going to talk a bit about what kind of errors did you see your learner make, right? Were they meaning errors, meaning in syntax, etc.? What is it that emerged and the kinds of errors? And the second piece is going to be around why the learner made those errors. Right? So and then also your evidence, right? So you know this child, but you also have a record of them reading it aloud. So that can include things like pace. For instance, the child, whether because of the child's own orientation or whether because of the timing that you did, and the child might have been rushed and might have been running through the running record faster than is typical, or were being, for instance, they were not reading out loud in a careful way. That might have been a cause for that, right? Another thing might be orientation. The student's hesitancy to read out loud, their frustration with the text, etc. These things all might play in. But it also might be a specific cognitive concern. It might be a specific concern about the instructional difficulty of the text, etc. And I want you to point to not just what errors they're making, but also why they're making those errors. Finally, let me just go over what to submit on April 12th. You'll submit the report, of course, and with the report, I want the completed running record form. So if you did it by hand, scan it. If you did it by computer, include a copy. And then if the text isn't in the running record itself, please include that as well.